Okay, go ahead, take it away whenever you're ready.
Okay, all right. Welcome everyone. My name is Irma Lawrence and I work at the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. And today we're gathered for our civil rights overview. We're very happy to welcome you and to join us. And we will be spending some time talking about different issues, and I'm gonna introduce to you our lead staff in this session, Jessica Creighton. Jessica, welcome and thank you for working with us. You could take it from here and you could introduce your staff. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So my name is Jessica Creighton. I am the Senior Equal Opportunity Specialist here at USDA NIFA. I am in charge of our compliance program for our grantees. And I wanted to just take a minute to introduce my staff before I get started talking about our compliance review process. If my staff wouldn't mind just waving when I say your name, I would appreciate it. So we have Lydia Cassell, who is an Equal Opportunity Specialist with our team. Marcus Long is also an Equal Opportunity Specialist with our team. Tanya Wilson is a Lead Equal Opportunity Specialist with our team. And Shabnam Azadi is a Lead Equal Opportunity Specialist with our team. And I'm gonna ask Shabnam actually to introduce herself and take a couple minutes to speak to you all, because she will be primarily responsible for leading the reviews of Hispanic serving institutions moving forward. So before I get into my spiel about everything in the process, I wanted her to just say hello.
Thank you, Jessica. Hello, everyone. Like Jessica mentioned, I will be taking the lead on doing the HSI review. So you'll probably be hearing from me, reaching out to get a contact and kind of just getting to know you, where your agency is or where your institution is, and kind of anything we can do in the interim, we will help you do. Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I'm Jessica Creighton. I came to NIFA USDA in February of 2020. Before coming to USDA, I did civil rights compliance of federally assisted programs at the U.S. Department of Labor, and also worked at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, done complaint investigations as well as compliance review of federally assisted programs, and have experience with enforcing and ensuring compliance with many different civil rights laws, including Title VI and Title VIII of the Civil Rights Act, Section 504 and 508 of the Rehabilitation Act, many titles of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Age Discrimination Act, Title IX, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm happy to be here and happy to introduce myself to all of you. I did actually see a few familiar faces, so there may be some folks on the line who are familiar with us from our 1862 or 1890 compliance reviews. But the purpose of today's presentation is really just to provide an overview. Give me a second here to get this started. Can I get a thumbs up from everyone that you can see my slides here? Great, thank you so much. So the purpose of today's presentation is really just to go over our civil rights compliance review process and how we're going to apply it to our Hispanic serving institutions. This is an effort that Drenda and Drenda is our Director of Civil Rights and Equal Opportunity, discussed when we started in February 2020, was just expanding our civil rights compliance work and technical assistance to include all of our different grantee institutions. NIFA Civil has been doing compliance reviews of our 1862 and 1890 extension and research programs for many, many years, decades, I want to say. And we had the thought process that we wanted to provide that opportunity for technical assistance to everyone, including our tribal colleges, including our Hispanic serving institutions, our different programs, such as our SARE regions, which provides subrecipients with funding, and really just work to get all of our NIFA grantees on board with civil rights compliance. And as I mentioned, this compliance review process is really an opportunity for technical assistance more than anything. And so this is kind of an introduction. I will have a link for additional resources at the end of this presentation, because this isn't intended to be, you know, an in-depth look at all civil rights issues and possible compliance with all of our civil rights regulations, but really just to give you an idea of what we're going to be working on starting in fiscal year 2022 with our Hispanic serving institutions. And as I believe was put in the chat by Kellyanne, if you have questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'm going to wait until the end to take questions, just because a lot of times I'll answer the questions on subsequent slides. But Kellyanne is going to help with those questions that you put in the chat throughout, and I will try to leave 10 or 15 minutes at the end to get to any of those questions. So again, we're just going to talk about the overall compliance review process, including the authority, purpose, and process, as well as the review areas and subcomponents. So first of all, why do we do civil rights compliance reviews, and what is our purpose and goals with those civil rights compliance reviews? The laws that I have listed on this slide provide us with jurisdiction and statutory authority to perform civil rights compliance reviews. These laws collectively prohibit discrimination on the bases of race, ethnicity or national origin, color, disability, sex, and age. And those first four laws, not including the Americans with Disabilities Act, apply to recipients of federal financial assistance, such as grantees that receive grants from NIFA. The Americans with Disabilities Act actually applies to any public entity, including most likely your institution, university, or college, but is not tied to federal funding. And those first four, you know, we often think about those as putting obligations and requirements on recipients of federal financial assistance and grantees. But it's important to note that they also actually have an obligation, contain an obligation for federal agencies that extend funding. So part of the reason that NIFA does these civil rights compliance reviews, and one of the main reasons that we're expanding our civil rights compliance reviews and technical assistance efforts to include Hispanic serving institutions, is because we have that obligation where we are extending federal funding in the form of grants. And so we need to ensure that anyone we're extending grants to is providing equal opportunity within those programs and activities in accordance with these laws. So we really look at our civil rights compliance reviews as an opportunity to check in on your institution and to do a checkup of your programs and activities, specifically with the civil rights lens. We look at it as an opportunity to provide technical assistance, so an opportunity to answer any questions that you have and provide guidance. Also, since we're doing the review, we really get the opportunity to do an in-depth look at everything you're doing and really understand your project and offer recommendations in that way. Our ultimate goal with these compliance reviews is voluntary compliance. The process that I'm describing today is a voluntary compliance process. That's not to say that compliance with civil rights laws is voluntary. It's not voluntary. If you receive federal financial assistance, you do need to comply with civil rights laws. But the point being that of the different methods and mechanisms that federal agencies have for ensuring compliance, the one that we're discussing today is one of voluntary compliance. So that means we're not, taking you to court or getting with an administrative law judge or anything like that. We're just working with you one-on-one to do that examination of your policies, procedures, and practices and provide you with recommendations with the understanding that you're cooperating with us. So you're providing us with the documentation we ask for, you're providing us with access to staff and leadership to conduct interviews, and you're making an effort to implement the recommendations that we provide to you and then provide us with documentations that you've implemented those recommendations. So that whole process is one of voluntary compliance. And that's why I said at the outset, this is really a collaborative process and a cooperative process where we want to work with you to understand your programs and your activities and provide you with guidance on civil rights related matters. And so again, these are systematic checks of policies, procedures, and practices. So if you are selected for a compliance review, it doesn't mean you did anything wrong. We're not, playing a game of gotcha. It's completely random check. We are selecting Hispanic serving institutions, 2 for each fiscal year right now. There's always a chance that in future years, we may want to do, more than that. But for now, our plan is to select 2 randomly each fiscal year from a pool of all Hispanic serving institutions that are receiving NIFA funding. If you are chosen to be reviewed, we will remove you from the selection pool for the next 5 years. That doesn't mean, of course, that if we review you, you're going to get reviewed again in 5 years. That just means that you're definitely not going to for the next 5 years. You still have to be randomly selected from the selection pool after those 5 years. And again, since this is fiscal year 2022 is our first year implementing these compliance reviews, we may come back in fiscal year 2023 with your feedback and from working with you and implement changes to our process that we think better reflects our Hispanic serving institutions. So please be aware, while the civil rights requirements are not flexible, those are requirements. How we do the reviews and how we evaluate things, we're very willing to work with you and hear your feedback once we get into this process. So basically how the review cycle process works is that you will receive an informal contact from our civil rights staff. I introduced you to Mrs. Adi earlier, so you'll receive an email and or a phone call from her, just reaching out to you, making sure that we have the right contact information for your institution's civil rights contact and or project leader to send our information to, and any other information that we need at that point, any initial information. And just to kind of touch base with you and let you know that this is going to be happening so you're not surprised by our scheduling letter and document request. The scheduling letter and the document request come next, and that's just the formal notification. And the document request will provide you with a list of documents that we would like you to send to us within 45 days. And the way that works is whatever documents you have that are responsive to our requests, you will send in. Anything that you don't have responsive documents for, you'll just indicate that on your response. We then take another 45 days to review those documents before we schedule our visit. Right now, those are, and for fiscal year 2022, those will be remote visits. That means we conduct interviews with relevant leadership, civil rights, and project staff over Zoom or Teams. We do hope in the future to do on-site visits once that's permitted, and we live in a world where COVID is no longer a concern. We would like to do some of those as on-site visits. In the future, after fiscal year 2022, we expect to be doing a mix of on-site and remote visits. Then after that is completed, we've reviewed everything. We've reviewed the information from our interviews. You will receive our findings, which will include a letter of concern, which lists recommendations for things that we believe could show improvement. Our findings could also be what is called a certification of compliance, which just means that we didn't have any recommendations or findings with regard to our review. If you do get findings that list concerns, you will have 60 days to respond to our concerns and recommendations and let us know how you're going to implement our recommendations. And again, that 60 days is just for your initial response. You can respond to our findings with either a corrective action plan that states what you will be doing in the future and the dates that you'll be doing them in order to meet our recommendations and our findings, or you can provide documentation that you have already implemented some of those measures that we're recommending, or a mixture of both. There may be some things that you've already implemented and some things that you're going to implement in the future. And this is the phase where I talked about we really are going to work with you to make sure that you are in compliance and provide you with technical assistance on things that you're implementing, things that we think could be done a different way. We'll review some of your documents and again, answer any questions that you have. But that's all based on our findings, which is just the conclusion of our evaluation of your program or activity. So next, I want to go into the review areas and subcomponents, and this section just talks about what our reviews cover for our Hispanic serving institutions. And I want to stress that this is an overview. So if you want additional information on any one of these areas, please feel free to check out our website. We have frequently asked questions as well as webinars, and we have a webinar on almost every one of these review area topics that I would encourage you to check out if you need additional information on any one of these review areas. And of course, I'll have my contact information and Mrs. Zadi's contact information at the end of this presentation if you have any follow-up questions as well. So these are our different compliance review areas. These are the things that we're going to be looking at within our civil rights compliance review. I'll give you a second to look at these items. And again, these are just based on those laws that I mentioned at the beginning and the corresponding requirements for all recipients of federal financial assistance. If you are a civil rights Title IX or equal opportunity person that works within other colleges or divisions, you will likely recognize many of these requirements that are things that are required by other federal agencies as well. And I also want to stress that these review areas are a holistic analysis. So we look at many different things to determine whether or not you're in compliance in an area and whether or not we want to issue recommendations. We look at the whole picture and how civil rights requirements interact with what your specific project or activity is doing. So with regard to the organizational capacity review area, we're going to be looking to see that you have a clear organizational structure, that there's a designated staff member at the recipient institution for civil rights and diversity issues, that there is regular communication between the designated civil rights staff member and the project team or recipient college or division. That means if you have a Title IX office or a disability rights office at your institution that handles these types of issues, they are providing you with appropriate training and communication on updated policies. We want to see that for any project partners that are related to the funded project or any subrecipients, you're utilizing written assurances of non-discrimination. And that has to do with a requirement within these non-discrimination laws that recipients of federal funding not subrecipient, not provide funding to a subrecipient, or work with a partner who is discriminating. And we want to see that there are no discriminatory or problematic employment practices. So that includes things like a non-discrimination employment policy and things like that. Review area related to civil rights knowledge and procedures. Here we want to see sufficient training for staff on civil rights requirements. So this is something institution-wide that should trickle down to your project team. We want to see that staff have access to needed civil rights documents and information, that there are procedures in place for filing employment and program discrimination complaints. So that would be complaints that would be filed under something like Title VII versus something under, Title IX or Title VI. And that there are internal civil rights compliance reviews or checks in place at the recipient institution. Review area 3 has to do with advisory boards and committees. We want to see that any advisory board, awarding committee, or review board that is associated with the funded project has members that are reflective of the local or service population in terms of race, ethnicity, and gender. That the selection processes of any such board or committee encourages diversity and or adequate representation of the service population. Now, if you do have representation issues within the advisory boards or awarding committees associated with your project, we just want to see that those diversity or representation issues that have been identified, that there have been corresponding efforts to obtain diversity on those boards, committees, or to address barriers to adequate representation. And so we're not asking that you force or have a quota for your boards or committees, but just that you are aware and monitoring the race, ethnicity, and gender makeup of those decision-making authorities and making efforts to obtain diversity if that is an issue. And again, this is one of those things, just to kind of give you an example of how our review process works, that if this was something that was identified within a civil rights review as a potential issue, we would work with you after that being one of our recommendations. We would work with you to develop those efforts to obtain diversity or to address barriers to adequate representation. If you already have those efforts in place and you can show us, great, we don't need to move into that with our compliance and monitoring phase, but just to give you an idea of how the process works and how we are wanting to help you and work with you to come into compliance. Review area 4 has to do with the equitable distribution of benefits. So we want to see that for our Hispanic serving institutions, the beneficiaries and or participants of those federally funded programs and activities are collecting race, ethnicity, and gender data for those who are benefiting or participating. And again, we have a entire training on what the different federally designated race and ethnicity and gender categories are, and guidelines for collecting this data. Many of you may not need to collect this data if your service population or beneficiaries are, for example, graduate students. Your institution already has that information, but you may be operating a different sort of program with participants where you need to collect that data. And so I encourage you, if you're not familiar with those requirements, to check out that webinar. Of course, if you're a civil rights staff person at an institution who has been a part of our compliance reviews before, you'll be familiar with those requirements. We want to see that participant beneficiary reg data is analyzed over time and against eligible service population data. So this is going to depend on your institution and your program. Obviously, if you are receiving your first HSI grant and don't receive any USDA funding, it's going to be difficult for you to analyze reg data over time. However, if you've been receiving HSI grants for 10, 12 years, we want to see some sort of comparison and analysis of who you're serving over time based on their race, ethnicity, and gender data. Beneficiaries of programs and activities should be at parity with the demographics of the potential service population. So that means whoever is eligible to receive or benefit from or participate in that program or activity should be within 80% of their participation rate. And again, this is something we can work with you on as we begin working with the Hispanic serving institutions for the first time. And similar to what we saw before in the previous review area, if you do have a potential representation issue, we just ask that corrective actions be implemented for any of those diversity issues that are identified. And then the last two items that I have here just have to do with making sure that educational opportunities or benefits and services that are allocated under NIFA funding are made available to everyone who's eligible. So any opportunities and requirements for participation are publicly available, are clear, and are equitable to people who could potentially benefit or participate in your program or activity. Review area 5 has to do with non-discrimination based on sex. This is the review area related to Title IX. We want to see that your programs, activities, contests, or awards that are associated with an HSI grant are not separated based on sex. And that is a bit simplified because Title IX does have some exemptions and exceptions, but I have simplified it for the sake of keeping this presentation reasonable in length. And in most cases, it's going to be, you want to make sure they're not separated by sex. We don't want to see any sex stereotyped names or illustrations on program materials, group names, or activity names. The recipient institution should have a sexual harassment policy that complies with the requirements of Title IX. Sexual harassment complaints should be handled appropriately, and staff should have had adequate Title IX training. Review area 6 has to do with public notification and outreach. These are USDA-wide requirements for all recipients of USDA funding, not just NIFA. And so the requirements related to public notification are that the non-discrimination statement is utilized on all print and non-print materials, including websites. The USDA and Justice for All poster is utilized in public spaces. That participants in virtual environments, for example, webinars, are also properly notified of the non-discrimination statement. And we want to see that the recipient institution, project, or college makes effort to conduct outreach to traditionally underserved communities, which can include things such as collaboration with community groups. And a lot of times, but not always, this will correspond to the corrective actions that we mentioned in review area 4 when we talked about underrepresentation and taking a look at who is participating and benefiting from our programs. A lot of times outreach activities will correspond to corrective actions related to that analysis, but not necessarily. Collaboration with community groups and outreach to underserved communities can take place outside of that as well. Review area number 7 of our civil rights compliance reviews have to do with accessibility for individuals with disabilities. This includes ensuring that the institution has sufficient reasonable accommodation policies and procedures in place, that a reasonable accommodation statement is used on documents and or websites, specifically those that are announcing activities or events. We want to see that the project staff have had training on reasonable accommodations. Again, looking at things that should be generically in place at the institutional level, and then looking to see that our specific HSI projects are a part of that and are receiving that training and that information that they need. We want to see that reasonable accommodation requests are handled appropriately, and generally that barriers for individuals with disabilities have been considered in project planning and implementation. Review area number 8 has to do with language access and the requirements of Executive Order 13166 as applied to Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. And this requires that institutions that receive federal financial assistance have a language access plan. That the potential service population and language needs of that potential service population have been assessed. That staff have been trained on language access obligations as well as prohibited practices. That competent and free interpretation and translation services are consistently provided. And that notification of language access services is provided, and outreach to limited English proficient individuals takes place as appropriate. It looks like I did not spell out that acronym. So that LEP individuals is limited English proficient individuals. So that is it for my presentation. I do want to provide here contact information for myself and for Ms. Azadi. You can contact either of us or both of us with any questions or concerns you might have. If you would like to join our NIFA Civil Rights listserv, please contact my colleague Lydia at this email address, lydia.cassell@usda.gov. If you want to request some of our USDA and Justice for All posters, we will also send them to you free of charge. You just need to contact Lydia. And then this is the link that I promised I would provide. It has all of our civil rights webinars. If you need to get up to speed on any of the topics that I mentioned today, please feel free to check those out. They can be opened with the password equal opportunity, capital E, capital O, all one word. And they're PDFs of the slides, so you have all of the written information, but then on the last slide of every presentation, there's actually a link to a training video that you can watch as well. So make sure to check that out. Definitely, if you feel like you want to go into more depth on any one of these review area topics. And like I said, I really want to stress, moving forward that this is a collaborative effort. We're looking forward to expanding our technical assistance efforts to our Hispanic serving institutions, and that it is, people oftentimes hear civil rights review and they get scared, but I just want to stress that it's really an opportunity for us to, go into depth and provide you with the technical assistance that you need for your projects. So I'm